did was get laughed at. You can go backtrack, but you never get cash back. And they told me I'm half black, but I'm white as a lab rat. With a mic and a gas mask and a life for your trash ass. And I might get the last laugh, gonna fight if you back.
Welcome to the Get Real podcast. I'm Austin, I'll be your host. And before we get into today's video today, I'd like to give some recognition to one of my editors. His name is Mavboy90. He has his own 2K gaming channel and will soon produce NBA related content. Please give him a shout out. Please give him some love. He's the guy who's going to be editing this video, and he'll be working on some of my projects going forward. So give that guy some love here. I am proud to bring back the man, the myth, the legend, Chris. And for those who don't know, me and Chris collabed on a previous video. I'll leave the link to that video in the description as well, about the San Antonio Spurs, and then maybe you can compare the two about where the Spurs were at then, where we thought they were then, and where we are at now, to give some context. Chris, man, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me again. It's good to be back, and a lot has changed in that time since we last talked.
Yeah, I remember when we had our last podcast, we were looking at the possibility of San Antonio potentially being in the lottery and likely getting their first lottery pick since '97. Things were not looking good. They were one of the worst defensive teams. Their offense was inconsistent, effective, but not consistent. They'd have tough nights, plenty of blowouts, and we were looking at one of Popovich's worst seasons. And now they went on this stretch since December 9th, and since then they've been borderline unstoppable. And when Christmas rolled around, I said, okay, look, they have a really tough stretch of games to January 12th with Denver a few times, Toronto, OKC a few times, among other really strong playoff contenders and other strong playoff teams in the league. So I said, let's look at this stretch from this, Christmas to January 12th, and that will be a good gauge for where this team is at. Obviously, there's been some really strong highs, beating Toronto, beating OKC, beating Denver, beating some other tough teams, and then we also dropped a few, and recently Charlotte the other night. So there have been really strong highs for this team. And through that stretch, from December 9th to now, they've had a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense. So their performance as of late is a complete 180 since the start of this season. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think one of the remarkable things during that stretch has been the emergence of guys like Bryn Forbes and Derek White and even Davis Bertans. What they've been able to do, they're shooting from the three-point line. Derek White's defense and his decision-making has just been remarkable. I mean, you've seen these guys grow before our very eyes, and I think Mike Finker wrote an article about Tony Parker's departure and how, as a result of that, we've had the opportunity to see some of the guards kind of step up, and that's been pretty incredible. And I know you had mentioned some of the slippage, particularly the past 2 games with Oklahoma City and the Charlotte game. And I think that's also kind of indicative of what this team is. You see that at their very best, they can hang with the big boys. They can take OKC to double overtime. They can, pretty much embarrass Kawhi Leonard on their home floor. I mean, they're very capable of those things, but when all is said and done, do they have enough juice after those kinds of things, or is there some depth missing? And I think that might be what we're seeing here now. And to that end, I also want to mention that, Marco was out the last game and Rudy Gay has been out too. So, I mean, there is somewhat of a depth issue, but when those guys were around, when they were healthy, I mean, they were looking like world beaters. So I think, a lot can happen when they get back as well.
Yeah, I want to say the games that Rudy Gay is absent, the Spurs win like 30% of them. He's been that big of a deal for them, despite being 32 years old off that big major injury. When he's out, we typically lose, and there are reasons for that. Partially, it's because he's the only small forward on this team. Behind him is Dante Cunningham, and so that plays a factor. So having him gone is a big deal. So now a choice is being made, whether it's during this season or come off season. What are we going to do to fill that small forward slot permanently going forward? Do we resign Rudy Gay to a big contract? Do we sign forwards in the draft, which is a very strong position 3, position 4 draft? This is the draft to do it. Where do we go from there? Do we look at a Chris Middleton or maybe a Tobias Harris to fill in that role? There are a lot of options that go into play here, and also we need to figure out what we're going to do with Patty Mills and Pau Gasol's contract during that time. Because now that Forbes is killing it, and so is Derek White, Mills looks like the 4th or 3rd point guard at best on this team, and I don't want to pay a guy like that $13 million, despite how much success he's brought to the franchise. And same goes to Gasol with Jakob killing it lately.
And, I speak hyperbolically here, but to me, this, and I mean this in a very sincere way, but this team is a Greek tragedy. And the reason I use the word Greek tragedy is because I see so, like you were mentioning, a lot of players stepping up, players like Rudy Gay knowing their roles, knowing their niche, and just coming in, executing, and the team looks amazing. And as you mentioned, being one small forward away. And the tragedy of that, I think, is that I would love to see what Kawhi Leonard could have been given this team. So Kawhi Leonard in a role where you're still facilitating the offense through LaMarcus Aldridge. He's playing the 5. He's running down the floor, posting guys up, looking for the mismatch. Imagine a Kawhi Leonard kind of player playing free safety, creating havoc on both ends of the floor. And then you have DeMar DeRozan being the main offensive facilitator, getting guys involved. And then you have, Bryn Forbes, Bellinelli, Bertans, all these guys, these great shooters. And yeah, even if you had the loss of Murray, the emergence of White, I think that would have been an incredible lineup. And it's just so unfortunate that we didn't get to see that sort of play out. So then I think the question is, who realistically could the Spurs get at small forward that could put them into contention? You're not going to get a guy like Kawhi. But who can you get either via free agency or the draft that can play that small forward position and have that sort of a wreaking havoc role where they're a two-way player. They can guard the 1 through the 4, and offensively they can create mismatches and at least, give the ball to them when the shot clock is winding down. They can create their own shots. So who, if anybody, is available in free agency? And if they're not available, who could you draft that could presumably develop within 3 to 4, however many years of Pop is left tenured? Through that duration, who could you get by the time everybody's ready to go and then make one last run at that title? Or is that even possible right now?
Now, I will contend that having today's Kawhi Leonard would not fit very well, just from the standpoint that even though he is a top 5 player in the NBA, he's an ISO guy. He, like you said, he goes for the mismatch. He doesn't really move the ball. Today he still averages like 2 or 3 assists per game. That's just the kind of guy he is, and that's the kind of player he is. And the reason this current Spurs team works so well is Pop, once again, he does something crazy with the player and unlocked DeMar DeRozan's passing ability, which makes him and LaMarcus Aldridge compatible, whereas it seemed kind of clunky between Kawhi and Aldridge before, but now there seems to be something fluid between those guys that just works more naturally. Today's Kawhi Leonard would not, to me, really fit in as well, but there are certainly options to where a guy like that, if they can just find him, whoever that may be, would just put this team over the top.
And to your point, I'm arguing that the 2014 Kawhi, the one who wasn't necessarily a black hole on offense that could basically be in that team game, in that beautiful game, that version of Kawhi would be great on this team. I don't think we need the current Toronto Kawhi who's putting up 40 and 15, whatever he does, and then the ball doesn't move around. I think that you're right. He didn't click with Aldridge very well within that kind of system. So, with that said, you don't need a superstar like Kawhi, but maybe a guy like Chris Middleton who can do those sorts of things. And then the question becomes, how can you land a guy like Chris Middleton? And so when you talk about Pau Gasol and Patty Mills, I think, shedding some of those contracts would be helpful. I think Jakob has done exceptionally well. There's Chimezie Metu, who's also up and coming. So, Pau's role might be a bit redundant. And of course, him being kind of more the lumbering, a little bit slower center without really any 3-point range kind of makes him, I think, expendable. And as far as Patty goes, him and Bryn Forbes are redundant. I think Patty's been a great leader, but at some point, you'll have to pick which one you want to pay more. So, an interesting thing about the Bucks, and this is kind of a long shot, but if they were to win the championship, how much money are they going to throw at guys to try to keep that team together? And will Chris Middleton be one of those priorities when they start trying to retain a so-called championship team? So that'll be interesting to see as well.
Yeah, when it comes to Chris Middleton and the possibility of him joining San Antonio, I think they're pretty slim, just off the basis that if you were to let go of one of their guys come free agency, it's going to be an Eric Bledsoe. You're going to want to keep Brogdon, who's just a really good glue guy for them, does a little bit of everything. Chris Middleton, who's their second best player. You're going to do a lot just to keep those guys, but he's not the only option out there. I mean, with the Spurs, they usually just find that guy, whether it's in the draft or in free agency where nobody really thought to give him a shot, and then, wow, he's a big part of their future. Now, having 2 picks, albeit one of them being a late first rounder, they have 2 tries now to go at either forward position and really pick some guys. Now, my question to you is, with all these things starting to settle in now, starting to come into place, where do the Spurs go from here?
It's a good question. I think with this group, what they've shown us thus far, you do explore the trade market. I mean, if something is painfully helpful and it's offered to you, obviously you want to take that. But if not, no worries on that end. And then I think you look at the buyout market as well and see if there's anybody that you can pick up who can help you. But I think the game plan would be to roll with this group into the playoffs and see what they can do. Now, we can have a whole other discussion about it, but, who would you want to have in that first round matchup? And I am just somebody who is clamoring that they play the Denver Nuggets in the first round. I think that has upset written all over it. Again, that's assuming the Spurs kind of stay in a lower seed and Denver in a higher seed. I think you try to avoid the Golden State Warriors like the plague. I just don't think that's a good matchup with this team. I still feel like there's so many mismatches that they could exploit. But I think if you could land Denver, the Clippers, Portland, maybe Houston if they're banged up, and if you could get any of those guys in the first round, hey, you're already making it to the second round, and then who knows from there? Who knows from that point on? I think if it'd be a really great season if they made the Western Conference Finals. You give Pop Coach of the Year and give R.C. Buford exec GM of the year, and if you had that kind of result there. If they keep the pieces that they have right now, I think you're going to see a title window open more sooner than later. And it all just depends on, I guess, how the season unfolds. And, of course, who you're able to get via free agency and who you're able to draft and how well they can adapt to the system. So, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, definitely keep this group and just see what they got. I know it's kind of not ideal right now, but once guys get healthy, I think they can make another push.
It's funny that you mentioned Denver. I just had a video released that, thanks to my fans, has been doing really well, where I really praised Denver and their future. But in terms of a matchup basis, I think San Antonio matches up with them very well from the aspect that they have very strong bigs to either slow down Jokic or make him play some defense. I mean, you have LA thrown out there playing another great year, and Jakob's doing great from the defensive standpoint, really showing us what he has. Matchup-wise, that would be a really good matchup for the Spurs and also a poor matchup for Denver, even though I would say that Denver still has a good shot. Not that San Antonio is that much of a better team than Denver. It's pure matchup standpoint. I still have Denver as my dark horse. But like you said, we now have a definitive idea of what this Spurs team is, what they're about, the pieces they have. The cupboard's not empty in terms of talent and youth, and the future's not as bleak as what we saw a few months ago. We actually have some hope now. So I want to thank you for coming on again. Hopefully either post trade deadline or close to the playoffs, right when this crazy West standings thing is more set in stone. We can sit down again, talk about the Spurs from that standpoint and how they match up, who they're going to go up against, and what they'll do from there. But once again, man, thank you for joining. Love to have you back on the show sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Looking forward to coming back and then seeing, what happens after the trade deadline or right before the playoffs. I mean, you never know. Kyrie Irving could be wearing a Spurs uniform or a Lakers uniform, and then we'll have a whole lot of other mess to talk about then. So thank you again.
Thanks, Chris. And there you have it, another wrapped-up session on the Get Real podcast. As always, for those who are listening, you guys have been fantastic. Give some love to my guy, MavBoy90 once more. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. Thank you so much for your support. Like, subscribe if you're new. If you haven't been here, I have a lot of other NBA content. Give me some ideas on any future videos if y'all have any. I always love to hear from you guys. My favorite thing personally is answering you guys in the comment section. You guys are awesome. Thanks for listening. This has been the Get Real podcast.